folks? Good morning. I feel so naked. I don't have a drink this morning. I finished my coffee already. You know, I don't know what we're going to talk about today. I've been watching the clips of Joe Biden and Trump doing their town halls, which to be totally fair, I think Joe Biden did like a really good job, just from in an election that doesn't have any policy sets built into it whatsoever. Like, if it's literally just like about personalities, I guess, or like just playing to people's like weird political kinks, then I think he did a much better job than Trump. The thing about it is, the Trump town hall was really funny because it kind of exposed the dynamic of like everything that Trump's life has been about, for all the people to see, because Trump knows how to work with like journalists and people who are too polite to be like, hey, wait, hold on, you're kind of full of shit. That's not what you said before. And like, they're not going to do that because they want access to him. They want to be, and if he calls their newsroom and is like, hey, that dude who asked me a tough question earlier, fuck him, I don't want to hear from him anymore. He's not allowed to have a one-on-one with me during election time or whatever. Well, that's a hit on their ratings, so they're not going to hit him too hard. But he had to actually deal with like regular people who aren't already rich and have like have a working bullshit detector still, and he had to deal with them in a fairly like unscripted setting. And there were several times where it just kind of exposed what his entire life has been about, which is just like, I'm gonna run on playing the media against each other and creating a villain. And you saw this with his like businesses and stuff too, or even like his personal brand, how he would like go after Rosie O'Donnell and make that a big thing, and then he'd have a show coming up or whatever, and then people would call him on his shit, hey fam, you're tweeting about Kanye or you're tweeting about Rosie O'Donnell or whatever, and he would just like wiggle out of it and move on to the next controversy. He's kind of running his presidency that way also. And it got exposed during this like this question about medicine. Here, I'll see if I can pull it up. This question about pre-existing conditions.
Do we run Obama?
So here, let me see if I can get to where.
You've been trying to strike down.
Yeah. Okay. So full credit to like ABC and George Stephanopoulos, right? Like, they actually did a pretty good job moderating this. Anderson Cooper was awful, but let's see. It's gonna work. Let's find out, folks. Let's find out.
Repeal Obamacare. You are arguing.
Well, I essentially did.
You are
Hold on.
guaranteed that.
All right, so this lady right here, she has like a chronic disease, and she basically made the point in her question that like, look, I had a choice when I was diagnosed with this chronic disease. I could have gone on disability and just lived off of like disability and Medicaid and all that kind of stuff, and just kind of consigned myself to that, and I would have been taken care of. But instead, I picked myself up by my bootstraps, like you guys always tell us, and I went and I got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a doctorate, and I'm a sitting professor at a university. And I still pay this insane amount of money for my healthcare every year because this is an insane system. What are you going to do to A, protect my pre-existing condition, and B, like figure out what the hell is going on with the healthcare system? All the questions from the media are always like, have you ever experienced white privilege? Or talk about race a little bit. But when you get actual people involved, they ask actual questions that people actually care about.
Buy it as the same price as everyone.
So he basically says like, oh no, I'm going to protect pre-existing conditions. I'm going to protect your situation.
Else. guaranteed a package of essential benefits, guaranteed that
Obamacare's
insurance
the real
companies couldn't
problem.
put a
And George is
lifetime
saying, no, no,
limit
no.
on those benefits. You fought to repeal Obamacare. You are arguing.
Well, I essentially did, because we got rid
You're
of the-
arguing.
This is how bad he is at politics. He literally goes, "Oh no, I did repeal it." When George is and everybody else is going like, "No, no, Obamacare is what's keeping this lady afloat, even though it sucks."
Supreme Court right now to strike it down. That would do away with pre-existing conditions.
So that we can do new health care.
But you've been promising a new health care plan. I interviewed you in June of last year. You said the health care plan would come in 2 weeks. You told Chris Wallace that this summer it would come in 3 weeks. You promised an executive order on pre-existing.
I have it already.
But you've been trying to strike down pre-existing
matter.
conditions.
I have it already, and it's a much better plan for you, and it's a much...
Okay, so regardless of what his answer is, right? Regardless of what he says his policy is, regardless of what Joe Biden says his policy is, because both of them stand for nothing and they have no policies. I'm just saying that in our lizard brains as human beings, we know what that looks like. That looks like a con artist. Because that's the same dynamic that you see of like somebody being pestered by their loan shark or whatever. Like, hey, Don, you owe me $300. You got to give me my $300. And he just starts going, "Oh no, I'll get you your money. I'll definitely get you your money. Hold on, I got it at my house. I gotta go get it." And then you see him again in a couple weeks. You're like, "Don, I need my $300." And he's like, "Well, yeah, no, I just gotta go pull it out of the ATM. Just hold up right here." And he never comes back. And then, you know, a couple of months later, you see him at the grocery store. And you're like, "Fam, I need my $300." And he's still like, "Oh yeah, man, you know, I got sick and I'm sorry, man. I would have got back to you. Let me run to the bank real quick." It's a continuous, like, slippery con artist dynamic that in our lizard brain somewhere, if we haven't already bought the story, we can recognize it. And really, that's all that this election is about. It's just like weird, wonky lizard brain reactions, because there are no policies, there are no actual like solutions for the problems in America. It's all just this instinct gut reaction to like how you feel about our country and how you feel about coronavirus, and just like everybody, you've got one side that's like, I'm only going to feel okay if we own the libs entirely. If we completely own the libs and like make them cry like little snowflakes, then I will be satisfied. And then the other side is like, I just want to go back to normal. I just want to not have to worry about politics every day of my life. Oh my God, everything's so scary. And so the only thing that is going to change any votes over the next like 57 days or however long is that lizard brain reaction. And it's probably not going to get anybody extra to vote, but it might get some of Trump's voters to not vote. Not vote for Biden, because that's absurd. They literally think that, you know, most of them literally think that he's the head of Antifa or something. That would be absurd. Really, what the goal here and why Joe Biden is literally hiding in a basement somewhere is because the goal is to just scrape off like 2, maybe 3% of Trump's vote and make people feel conned, because they have been, or screwed over in some way by the guy that they elected, and they just want to shame them into not voting, which is the sign of an extremely unhealthy democracy. And oh my God, what a hellscape do we live in, that we're not trying to actively help people, we're just trying to shame voters. But that's the dynamic. That's the only thing that's going to change the outcome of the election. And if that is your understanding of our electoral position as a society right now, then this is a big loss for Trump. This is Trump getting absolutely owned. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. You know, like Trump, he gets a question in this town hall from she's a Mexican immigrant, and her mother was an illegal immigrant living here in the country, but she passed away like a month ago from breast cancer. And she had been in the country for like 3 decades or something like that, and worked her whole life, put her kid through school, like the American dream, basically, right? Like if it was a white person, you'd be like, damn, that's a hardworking white person. You know, our society would view it that way, I mean. And she says, my mother died of breast cancer, and she wanted so badly to be a citizen. She wanted so badly to be able to go through the process and be a citizen, but she was always so afraid. And the question is, like, what are you going to do to revamp our immigration system and provide for people that are trying to immigrate here for a better life, and blah, 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 blah. And he goes, and she is crying her eyes out, right? Like, her mom just died. She's very emotional. And Trump's answer is literally like, well, we've got a big plan coming for immigration. And then he pivots because he didn't hear her say breast cancer. He thought that she said her mom died from coronavirus. And so he just goes on a 5-minute tangent about how he did the right thing with coronavirus. His response was good. Joe Biden didn't want to shut the country to China. Because he closed the country, he saved thousands of lives. The outcomes have been way better. And he literally uses 5 minutes of this to just be like, look how good I did. And I'm telling you, man, in an election that is not decided on any sort of principles or policies or anything at all, that makes all the difference, because it triggers people's stupid lizard brain to be like, wait, hold on. This reminds me of my, like, douchebag drug addict nephew or whatever that is always, like, taking money from me, or, like, always steals my shit. Like, it triggers that lizard brain thing in your head to be like, something doesn't sit right. And because we have no actual informative education system or media, that's basically what American popular elections come down to. It's just that dynamic. And then on the other side, like Joe Biden, he gives an answer. So, I don't know. Y'all tell me, right? I thought this answer... I have mixed emotions about this answer. Hold on a minute. Get back to this. Hold the phone.
Do you see ways that you've benefited from white privilege?
Sure, I've benefited just because I don't have to go through what my black brothers and sisters have had to go through, number one. But number two, grow up here in Scranton. We're used to guys who look down their nose at us. We're looked at people who look at us and think that we're suckers. Look at us and they think that we're not equivalent to them. If you didn't have a college degree, you must be stupid. If, in fact, you didn't get to go to an Ivy school. Well, I tell you what bothered me, to tell you the truth. Maybe it's my Scranton roots, I don't know. But when you guys started talking on television about Biden, if he wins, will be the first person without an Ivy League degree to be elected president, I'm thinking, who the hell makes you think I have to have an Ivy League degree to be president, Dan? I really mean it.
All right, so that has been lauded as the best moment Joe Biden's had in the general, and I don't know that I agree. He still sound, like, maybe I'm just biased, but he still sounds like his brain is melting. Which, I mean, whatever. I guess we've all accepted that at this point. But I think that there is a dynamic that shows up there that is important. We have this enormous, and by we I mean like at least the nominal left in this country. We have this enormous energy behind the Black Lives Matter movement and racial inequality and trying to understand race relations in this country and be more educated and shit. So much energy behind that. That is the driving cultural force of the left right now. And even though there's so many more issues, that seems to be the one that has done the best at kind of penetrating and infiltrating our media, our corporate structures, like social media, the way that we consume, and just capitalism in general. It's the one that has the most tendrils out there and is making the most change, even if it's not substantive, right? And I think that what Joe Biden did there, and I don't think that he intended to do this, but the effect was he moved that from a purely identity conversation about, like, have you experienced white privilege? Well, of course I have. Because I haven't had to deal with the stuff that other minority people have had to deal with. black people specifically, have had to deal with in American society. But he says, I come from Scranton. I'm working class. Like, I didn't go to an Ivy League school. You guys always look down your nose at me because I'm this and I'm that. And even if that's not entirely true, because like he's a total grifter and has used most of his political career to enrich his to do like weird phony deals with like banks and shit, and enrich his family members and all that kind of stuff, and it's just regular DC corruption, of course. He comes across as like middle class and like hardworking Joe, you know, which is nonsense. But he comes across that way, and people like that. People identify with that. And like I said, he's doing a good job of moving it from a like Black Lives Matter, identity politics sort of argument to a class-based argument without minimizing the racial aspect of it. And I think that the left could learn from that. Bernie Sanders tried to do this and often fell on his face because his argument was, yes, racial animus and problems in this country do exist. Of course. And the way that you solve those is a universality of programs like Medicare for All, free education, canceling student debt, all that kind of stuff, everything that he ran on. Because he would say without saying, because I don't think he ever said this, a rising tide lifts all boats, essentially, was the argument. Like, if you have all of these programs for people and you make them available to everyone, then racism is a much harder, has a much harder time penetrating society because there aren't the loopholes. You are universally lifting everyone up. You know, like, for instance, Medicare for All. If we had Medicare for All, it would be everyone's medical care. If you make $1 million a year or you make $30,000 a year, your healthcare is the same. There's not a disparity in how people are treated. Plus, you would not have a disproportionately black, disproportionately minority, disproportionately, by definition, poor group in this country that uses programs like Medicaid. And therefore, they wouldn't be demonizing Medicaid as like a dog whistle for poor and brown and black people. And getting rid of that dynamic and making it universal enforces as a society the dynamic that like, no, everybody gets the same treatment under society. It eliminates some of that. And he would make that argument effectively. The problem is, he never tied it to, yes, there is racial issues, but those are on top of the idea that there is a class dynamic in this country where, like, rich people are literally sucking the blood of the poor people, essentially, at this point. The wealth transfer is so insane, and the numbers are so unprecedented that it's clear that there has been a tectonic shift in the amount of wealth that is distributed from the top to the bottom of society. Just simply because we have set up our tax system, our legislative system, our laws in such a way that if you have money, you can take advantage of all that stuff. And I think that he did a good job, even if he didn't mean to, because he doesn't mean to do anything. He's just a man lost in the dark. He's like a guy that stumbled into the wrong house. Like, I don't think that he's like a dog chasing cars, you know, like he wouldn't know what to do if he came up with an original idea. But I think that he accidentally stumbled on an important thing that if we continue to reinforce it, will change the conversation in this country to more of a class dynamic. And frankly, there are a lot of people on the left, and a lot of people, namely on my Twitter feed, right, that continue to say they're not going to vote for Joe Biden. Or, well, really, yeah. And all the other, like, factions underneath that The people who have decided, I'm on the left and I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden. Look, I get that, right? I don't think that your vote particularly matters if the rest of your life is not politically involved. So I don't think that it matters if you, vote for Joe Biden or don't vote for Joe Biden if you're on the left, because ultimately, what difference is that going to make to your personal political involvement if you don't understand the tactics involved, right? But from my point of view, the fact that Joe Biden has to talk about these things, right? The fact that he has to say things like healthcare is not a privilege, it's a right. Now, he doesn't support, he has made no policy proposals that support that statement. He has made no actual concrete position stances that support that. In fact, it's to the contrary. I'm not saying that, he's FDR overnight, but what I am saying is the fact that he even has to say that to be a viable Democratic candidate means that the left is winning. It's just not, like, what's been so successful about the right in this country is that they're willing to say, look, we want to outlaw abortion for whatever reason. And I'm just using that as an example. We don't care if it takes 50 years to outlaw abortion. We will sit here and elect people who tell us that we can do it and fund all sorts of media outlets, legal representation, legislative action, and we will pound the pavement about outlawing abortion, or overturning Roe v. Wade, or whatever you want to call that. And if it takes a century, then we will consider that a win. Whereas the left is like, well, we didn't elect Bernie, so let's take our ball and go home. Like, you have to take what you can get, and we are moving the conversation. Like, the fact that Joe Biden has to say, yes, I enjoyed white privilege in this country, but really it's a class issue. And I had a hard time because I was poor. The fact that that we're even having that discussion as a country is largely in part to to two Bernie Sanders campaigns and the refusal of progressives and people on the left to equivocate on these policies. The fact that he has to talk like that is a win. It's a very tiny one. But politics is not I want something and I'm going to get it next week. And I know that sounds very like you got to believe in incrementalism, which is bullshit. There is a middle ground, right? There is a middle ground between saying I want Medicare for all and look, 65% of people want Medicare for all, give us Medicare for all. Which, yeah, that's how it should work in a real democracy, but we all acknowledge that that's not what we live in. And unless you're going to unless your plan is to convince regular people, not people who you're insulated with in your algorithm, but regular people to overthrow the government and start a brand new system when they have kids in school and jobs and they are literally living paycheck to paycheck, is en masse. You have mass immiseration and homelessness and despair. And you want people to cut the only thread remaining to what makes sense in how they think America operates by literally being like, no, we're not going to vote for Joe Biden. We're going to accelerate into Trump, and then we're going to what? Get into the streets? Burn down the White House? You know what I mean? Like what is that end game? There has to be a middle ground somewhere where you say, look, yes, I am on the left. I would prefer that everybody has housing, healthcare, food, education, right? I would prefer that they have all of those things. Of course, taxpayer provided. Infrastructure, jobs. I mean, like, real robust use of our tax dollars that is not building a bomb and dropping it on brown kids. Like, literally spending the money that comes out of my paycheck on my community, on my country, on the people that live in my country. Yes, of course, right? But what, like, where do you think this revolution is going to come from? You're going to do a general strike? With who? And who are you going to negotiate with? The guy who turns the federales on protesters? That's who you're going to negotiate with? Or how about you're going to negotiate with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who do not give a shit, clearly, and are unwilling to negotiate with anyone about anything? They won't even, neither party will come to the table for coronavirus relief. And you think that you're going to convince people to not choose normalcy and instead hurtle into another 4 years of Trump, accelerate, right? And you may be right. Maybe. You may be right that if everybody just said, like, screw this, if everybody on the left said, screw this, I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden, I'm withholding my vote, and if we get Trump, we get Trump. And if your theory is that we get Trump, and that's so bad that we will accelerate to, Super Bernie or whatever, running for president next time on a populist message, right? Maybe you're right. But people aren't going to do it. That's just not, it's not going to happen. And if it did because people have an understanding, they have a deep seated need for security. And choosing between one of these two guys is one of the last normal things left in American society. And so they have to do it. They have to do it. You are not going to stage like some sort of grand revolution where, like there's guillotines in the street and stuff. That's not a thing. It's wishful thinking, and it is you coping with the fact that the left has been utterly smacked. That's just you coping. And so you have to get real. Like, I know that that makes me sound like the Hillary people. I get it. I totally get it. But you have to get real about what is achievable under the circumstances. And some people will make the argument, insanely, that working with Trump might be easier because he's a populist. He's not. That clip that we watched earlier, he's just a con artist. And the jig is kind of up because he's having to deal with real people. Because he was banking on the fact, and dude, the odds were pretty good that this was going to be the case. He was banking on the fact that nothing bad would happen. That it would be a pretty uneventful presidency. He gets elected. He does his 4 years. It's a pretty uneventful presidency. Maybe he even gets reelected. But he was betting that, like, he might have to deal with a couple of hurricanes, or he might have to deal with, like, bombing one or two places or something like that. Like, making a couple of difficult decisions. But he wasn't expecting, like, once in a century pandemic that he would have to respond to. And so he went into it thinking like, I can just kind of like freeball this for a little bit and maybe, personally enrich myself and my buddies and my family. And, get in, get out, and, whatever. It'll be easy. And the media is easy to deal with. I can bullshit them and all that kind of stuff. But now he's run up against, and he would have been right had coronavirus not happened, probably. Because at large, people don't want to pay attention to this stuff. They don't want to pay attention to politics. They don't want to have to deal with it. They just want to elect people who will make decisions to make their lives better, and then like trust them, be able to trust them to do so. And that hasn't been the dynamic in decades, right? But he thought, he was betting that if we didn't have a giant emergency, people wouldn't depend on him to do anything about it, and he could just kind of coast, like he's done with everything else. And that's not what happened. And so now he's doing the part of the presidency that he despises the most. You can tell because he's always fucking angry. And that's deal with actual people. Like, he has actual voters who are actually like, dude, like, I get it, haha, own the libs, but like, we're in trouble. They are the people who are being sought out by our media and projected, which is giving leverage to his opposition. So I just don't understand. We have to take wins where we can get them. And I know that sounds incrementalist. I know that it sounds defeatist. I know that it sounds centrist. But we have to take wins in this where we can get them, because if you don't take the wins, you stop the public narrative momentum that you are building. And because politics is entirely social in America, that's the only way to move shit. The only way to move shit is to get it played on the news all the time, all the time, all the time. If you look at the polling, when the Black Lives Matter protest started, support for Black Lives Matter was like north of 70% in America. The reason being, it's because it's what the media was talking about all the time. And people were forced to think about it. They were forced to think about it. They were forced to take a side. It was very binary. And that's what Americans need, is they need multiple choice, and they need two things to make a decision. Multiple choice, because that's how we're taught, and what are my friends thinking? And the confluence of people on social media flocking to the Black Lives Matter movement, and the choice of, you like Black Lives Matter or you're racist, early on. I'm not saying that's the choice now. I'm just saying early on that was the choice. The confluence of those two things made it easy for Americans to make a decision and support something, because it was very black and white. And what I'm saying is, if you want to continue to do that, you have to create these black and white issues. You have to start to say, look, because we live in a binary system. We live with, it is a binary choice. There's only a certain amount of votes, there's only a certain amount of people that are going to vote, and there's only two people to vote for. That's it. That's it. Like we've talked about 100 times on this stream, like, it's an allocation of resources issue, and if you are allocating the votes incorrectly, you will be screwed. And so you've got to find a way to allocate more votes to one side than the other. And in this case, the way to do that is just to amplify a message. It's just to signal boost a message. And eventually it will bury its way into the psyche of America. And we will get to a place where enough people, say 40% or 50% or something like that, support the broad policy structures that need to happen. Now, you could argue that in a lot of categories, that threshold has already been met. And that is true. Vast majority of Americans support raising the minimum wage, support Medicare for all, blah, 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 blah. And on down the list. Ending the wars, free education, canceling student debt. It's all the way down. It's yay all the way down. The problem now is that you have to change the media narrative. You have to make it undeniable. And the fact that Joe Biden is going on to CNN, Joe Biden, the corporate candidate, the Bank of AMA or whatever, Bank of AMB or whatever, senator from AMB Bank, that guy, or whatever it's called in Delaware, that guy has to go on television and say things like healthcare is a right. And say things like, yes, white privilege is a thing, but also being rich as fuck is also a privilege, and it sucks for poor people. And actually, actually having people who are suffering. There was one of these during the Biden town hall of a guy that works at a cancer facility and has been constantly exposed to COVID-19. He makes less than $15 an hour. and he had to take out a credit card just to pay for his groceries. And that's a healthcare worker. That's a hardworking person that is literally keeping our society afloat right now. And they're having to live like that. I mean, this guy's life is going to be permanently screwed when COVID is over because he's going into debt to pay for food. And the fact that you put stories like that, you can put stories like that on corporate media in this country now. That would not have been the case. You know, I'm old enough to remember when George Bush did a town hall when he was campaigning for president. And a woman stood up and said, I work 3 jobs. And then asked her question. You know, Mr. President, I work 3 jobs. What are you going to do to help me? Blah, blah, blah. Whatever, right? And you know what George Bush said back to that? And was met with like, the media responded to this answer with like, wow, that was very presidential. What a guy. What a nice guy. He really comes off as friendly and folksy. He said, you work 3 jobs? Would you look at that, folks? Isn't that something special? The dedication, only in America will you find the dedication necessary to work 3 jobs to make ends meet. Only in America will you find the societal conditions where people have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet. But the fact that the media reaction and what mainstream presidential candidates are saying on the stage over the last 15 years is the answer to that. This guy says, I have 1 job and I make less than $15 an hour. And Joe Biden goes, oh my God. That was his response, to audibly say, oh my God. Like, the fact that that is coming out of the mouth of a presidential candidate on corporate media in this country suggests that we are entering into a similar dynamic that FDR had when FDR was running for president. Now, I am not saying that Joe Biden is FDR. He is not. He is an empty husk preparing for death. I'm just saying that before FDR ran for president, there was an understanding. The 20s had been very, very, very good to people at the top. There's a reason it's called the Gilded Age. The Roaring 20s, if you will. And the dynamic that was present when FDR was running for president was he was a class traitor. He was born amongst those rich people. And when he was elected, he got those people into a room and he made it very clear that you can either give me your money, I'm going to raise taxes, and you can either pay those taxes and shut the hell up about it, or these people are going to knock down your door and come take it from you. And he made it very clear that I am between you and the pitchforks. That's an Obama quote, but he was using it a different way. And he said, look, FDR's entire stance on this was fine. If they hate me, that's fine. That means that I'm doing my job. Because there is too much money there's too much of society's resources and too much money that has accumulated at the top. We need to cut that down and put it into rebuilding the country, jobs programs, healthcare, military spending. Name the issue. Name the thing that the New Deal society built in America. Basically every federal building that you've ever walked into was built during the during the New Deal society. As part of a massive program of wealth redistribution. And it's the reason that America excelled for decades. And that dynamic is starting to present itself again, because why else would you explain these things being allowed to be said on our completely captured corporate media? How else would you explain that? It is because there is a dynamic developing that we are clearly on the path of, like, you either reform society, even if it's a little bit, to ease the pain of regular people, or they will come and take it from you. They will get into the streets. They will burn shit down. They will destroy property. You either grab the knobs of society that you have been entrusted with and twist and turn them in a way to ease the suffering of the vast majority of Americans, or they will come and take it from you. Now, maybe that doesn't happen tomorrow. Maybe that doesn't happen a year from now. Maybe that doesn't happen 10 years from now, but we are well on the road to that being the case. And so because that dynamic is starting to exist, you have corporations and large stakeholders in our economy starting to do the math of like, look, Facebook is a pretty good example. Google, pretty good example. These companies are opening up to congressional testimony, to oversight, to being a little bit more, they're still goblins, but being a little bit more responsive to democratic rule. Why? Because there is talk of trust busting in the air. And if in their eyes, if the wrong president gets elected, they're going to get busted. I don't think that's Joe Biden. But if they don't dramatically improve their public perception, they are going to open themselves up to a popular opinion about busting them and about going after them for being monopolies and antitrust. It's the same dynamic that you see developing on the Supreme Court. We've had 2 major Supreme Court decisions come back the opposite of what we thought they were going to, because we have a conservative Supreme Court. That's just common knowledge. And the decisions that they made about trans rights and immigration over the last 6 months indicate that you have people sitting on the Supreme Court who are doing the math. And they're realizing, look, there are no congressional restrictions. There are no legislative restrictions to adding judges to the court. A president can just do that. A president can just be like, yeah, the Supreme Court's 9 people now. I want it to be 13. And just start nominating folks. And the Supreme Court is looking at that. The judges on the Supreme Court are looking at that and saying, look, if we want to retain the authority that we have, because all institutions will maintain their own power first. That's just the law of institutions. If we want to maintain the power that we have as an institution, then we need to start thinking about the fact that we look crazy. We look very conservative. And so we've got to tack back a little bit and give the other side a couple of wins so that there's not mass calls to pack the court and dilute our authority. It's the exact same dynamic there that is developing at Google, at Facebook, even at Amazon, Walmart, Target.
Sorry, I don't understand.
That has triggered them responding to union demands, or at least like bending when a union starts to form. Amazon not included in that, but wage hikes. You see this at Disney, because they're starting to do the math. They're starting to say, look, this dam, we've got our finger in the dam here. And if we fill this hole that we got our finger in with some concrete, then we could buy ourselves another 10 years of this dam before it cracks again, and we got to deal with it. And it'll be a bigger crack, and it'll probably be catastrophic, but we can push it off a little bit. And in the meantime, we're getting all the free energy out of this dam. Right? And they're starting to look at that and say, they're starting to look at that and say, we have got to be open to the idea that we are going to have to break off a little more of the crumbs. And the people that aren't going to make it are the hyper insane people that bet on like 100% growth and 100% subjugation of like the plebs forever. These are your companies like Uber. I'm trying to think of like other like gig shit. Uber, Grubhub, like these Favor, like these companies that are like just in time delivery. You order shit from the app on your phone, or you get a car, Lyft. Those kind of companies that were banking on people just getting the shit kicked out of them financially for decades until they could turn a profit. They're going to go under eventually, because there won't be enough social fabric set up to back them up. You've already seen this with Uber getting regulated. And then, yeah. So, you know, you're developing a dynamic where class has become part of the conversation. And that was not the case just 10 years ago. I mean, Obama was probably the most, like, he talked about class the most. But for nothing. You know, I mean, we got basically nothing out of that. And so I think, I don't know, man. Like, maybe I'm just a gaslit American. Like, maybe I'm just maybe I possess the brainworm that I talk about of, like, Americans being children of alcoholics and making excuses for their leadership. Maybe. And maybe I'm buying the whatever Joe Biden's selling. It's possible. But I think that you have to put stock in the fact that, like, nothing is going to be achieved without, and try to step out of your algorithm for a minute and think about this, because it's taken me a lot of soul searching to understand this dynamic as well. Nothing is going to be achieved by betting the house on somebody like Bernie. And then when Bernie doesn't make it, burning the house down. Because you're not getting, 60 to 70% of what you wanted. You're only getting 10 to 20%. Say, in a vacuum and an actual democracy, I would say, of course, go for 100% of what you want. It's a democracy. But we don't live in a democracy, clearly, and we don't live in a vacuum. We have to compete with another side, because it's a binary choice, with another side of politics. And like I said, that other side of politics is willing to sit and wait and outlast you. They are willing to go on and on and on for decades, and they have the money to do so, to slowly but surely dismantle the protections in society for regular people. Whereas the left gets really, really excited about a presidential candidate, or really, really excited about a congressional candidate, and talks about issues and really, like, brings things to the forefront until that person gets elected. And then they either go back to sleep and stop talking about most things political, or they turn on that person that they have elected because they didn't turn out to pull the levers of power the way that they wanted to. They didn't turn out to do the things that in their personal mind palace of politics wanted them to do. And that sort of movement will cannibalize itself. The right has been able to, the base has been able to forgive and forget and move on as politicians have gone up and down on the scale of doing what they want. And they are willing to jump on board. Now, they're getting conned, but they're willing to jump on board of the little pet issues and stuff the cultural issues that they want to take care of. So, like, for instance, does everybody remember when everybody on the right hated Ted Cruz because he was rude to Trump? And then Ted Cruz came around, after Trump publicly called his wife ugly and stuff. He came around and was like, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Trump," and kissed the ring. And now everybody on the right is like, "Yeah, Ted Cruz, Supreme Court, let's go." Right? That's because they're willing to understand that, like, a movement takes time. And people are going to suck along the way. Like, how long has Rand Paul been saying insane things? And they're just like, okay, well, I mean, whatever. It's politically useful. In the grand scheme of things, we keep Rand Paul because he's the crazy guy, and we can write him off every now and again in order to get XYZ passed. We can throw him under the bus sometimes, or we can make him the cudgel to beat people with because he's like a fiscal conservative and a true libertarian or whatever. And, he's consistent he's got that dynamic the Democrats have made up of like, well, I disagree with Rand Paul, but at least he's consistent. Well, he's consistently awful. But that with George Bush, like, I disagree with some of the decisions that George Bush made, but at least he loved America and our troops. So I think that, like, the takeaway here, after watching all that, I think that the takeaway here should be like, look, if presidential politics are your way of feeling like you did something, but you are going to leverage that your vote for president in a way to build a media momentum and a political momentum that will lead to the causes that you want, okay? Then left as a whole to have Joe Biden as president. And given the choices, it would be more beneficial, slightly, for Joe Biden to be the president rather than, at least if we're arguing with Joe Biden, they are the, like, argument fetish people. Like, they are the people that are like facts and good arguments and debate and science and all that bullshit. And so we can talk to those people in a realm of reality. And then if they are stupid, then that is if they are purposefully stupid, for instance, on the issue of climate change, if we go to them and say, hey, if we don't do something in the next 10 years, we're going to be figgity fucked. And they say, well, I don't believe you, we'll do something in the next 50 years. Then we can leave that up to the American people. And we can have that conversation. We can say, look, here's the science. We are going to be screwed. And force them to make a conversation, to make a different conversation. There's a moth in here. But if it's Trump, hey, climate change is a thing. It's going to get colder. It's going to get colder. Trust me. It's going to get colder. Don't worry about it. It'll get colder. How do you work with that? He's right. It will get colder. It might even snow. But that doesn't mean that climate change isn't real. So how are you going to work with that? So I think this is pretty easy calculus. In fact, I think the calculus was much harder when it was Hillary Trump. Because it was very clear that Hillary didn't give a shit about anything except putting, like, first woman president on her tombstone. When she, like, stops eating children or whatever and dies at the old age of 235. So, yeah. I don't know how we got there, but I think that's the major takeaway.